Harriet. I know it's not customary to show up early for a reunion, but I don't care. I want to see Brad when he first arrives, if he even comes at all. Neither he nor I have ever been to a reunion before. The last time we saw each other was 25 years ago, right at graduation. I doubt he'll want to see me, but I live in hope that he's willing to forgive me. I sit at the table where I see my former classmates come in and register for the banquet and dance. Thank goodness there are name tags. So far, I haven't recognized anyone by sight, nor have I exchanged the lie that you haven't changed a bit. Mostly we're fatter, grayer, and slower than we were. 25 years ago, Brad and I were getting engaged, planning to get married while he was in college or after he graduated. I expected the ring shortly after our high school graduation. We had been an established couple for over a year and had known each other for many more years. No one envisioned what would happen, at least not me. During spring break, Brad went on a mission trip to Ethiopia with his church's youth group. I missed him very much. Frederick Donaldson was the big man on campus that all the girls ran after. He didn't pay attention to me for most of our high school life, but it didn't bother me because I had Brad. He asked me out on a date. I said, "Brad and I are fine. You know that. You and I are over 18 years old. That means we are of age and can decide what we want to do. Well, I want to remain faithful to Brad." "Are you engaged yet?" "Well, no." "Then there's no harm in going on a date with a friend." Why the sudden interest in me? For two reasons. One, I've always berated myself for not asking you out before you and Brad started dating. Two, shortly after graduation, I'm going to be leaving to stay with my parents in New York City. I'll be living alone until graduation. If we don't go on a date now, I may never have that opportunity again. I had heard about the exquisite restaurants where Frederick had his dates, the kind that neither my family nor Brad could afford. What girl wouldn't want to ride in a brand-new Corvette convertible? Frederick was the best-looking and richest boy in his graduating class. My defense was weakening. "I think I should check with Brad first. I thought he was in Ethiopia. I don't think you'll have time to talk to him." "Can we make sure Brad doesn't find out?" "Sure, I can take you to Overton where none of the locals ever go." We made a date for Friday. He took me to a French restaurant where they don't ask how much the food costs. Frederick ordered for me. I was surprised that the waiter brought a bottle of champagne when we were both only 18 years old. Money has its privileges. I'd never tasted champagne before, but I didn't want Frederick to think I hadn't. I drank it as if it were soda. I felt good immediately. Frederick was charming and regaled me with stories about the places he'd been and the important people he'd met. He promised to introduce me to my favorite band that he knew personally. As we got up to dance, I hoped the night would never end. He hugged me so tightly I felt like I had become a part of his body. His hand on the top of my ass pulled me to him. It appeared that this was how most couples danced. Again, I didn't want him to think I wasn't used to dancing like this. I started to get aroused. I imagined I was with Brad, and I pressed myself harder against Frederick, who had replaced Brad for me. He kissed me, and I kissed back. Like he said, I wasn't engaged yet and wanted to show my appreciation for dinner and dancing. I was beginning to get drunk. Frederick said he was worried what my parents would think if I brought her home in such a state. He suggested we have coffee. I accepted. Before I knew it, we were in the hotel room and Frederick was already making coffee. We sat together on the bed while the coffee brewed. He flattered me and started kissing me again. Although I kissed him back, I weakly said, "We shouldn't." His lips continued to wander, and my body expressed pleasure while my mouth kept saying, "We don't have to." He said he admired my restraint. "You're such a strong woman, I bet you could have stayed away from temptation." I liked the compliment and agreed. He said, "Let's prove it." Before I knew it, he had his pants down and was popping out in all his glory. I have to admit he was impressive. I was in shock. "See, you weren't scared. I bet you could even touch it and not get turned on." I was already horny, but I couldn't admit it. He quickly laid me on my back and pulled down my panties. I was about to yell "stop" when the most wonderful feeling overtook me. My mouth was saying no, but my body was moving in rhythm. With a little squirming and moaning, I experienced a finish, the strongest I had ever felt. I pulled myself together and sat up. I told him that was all I could do. It felt so good I knew it was a lie. I waited to be convinced otherwise. He repeated again that we would be breaking up soon. Then he added that this might be my last chance to experience another man before I officially committed to Brad. I guess this reasoning and the remaining champagne influence made us go from kissing to sex again. My seduction was gradual and seemed inevitable. About half an hour into the second round of sex, it came to me what I had done. I started crying. I was saving my virginity for my husband. What am I supposed to do now? Frederick declared, "You are the best woman I have ever made love to. Harriet, I have always been in love with you. Now I believe it is love. I want you to come to New York with me." I can't just leave like that. What about Brad? What about college? Harriet, what do you think Brad will do when he finds out what we did tonight? Do you really want to worry about college and finding a job? Didn't you say you wanted to be a wife and mother first and foremost? You can do that and not worry about money if you marry me. Frederick, this is too much for me to handle the way I feel. Please take me home. I stayed away from Frederick until Brad returned. The guilt felt like a 50-pound bag weighing me down. I was so ashamed. I was sure that by looking at me, everyone realized what I had done. I knew my parents would disown me if they found out. To leave, Frederick or not, sounded better and scarier with each passing moment. I was nervous when Brad and I first met after his trip. I thought for sure he was going to see the scarlet letter A on my forehead. But Brad was so engrossed in telling me about his missionary trip that I don't think he would have noticed anything different about me if Frederick and I hadn't made love in front of him. I just let him talk and talk and talk about what a life-changing experience it was. He seemed so disinterested in what I was doing while he was away that I was able to reduce my guilt over the following weeks. I was back to my usual Brad girl lifestyle, and he didn't notice that anything was wrong. I thought everything was fine too until I missed my period. I wasn't on the pill because I wasn't married yet. That night I was too engrossed to check if Frederick was wearing a condom or not. The chances of me getting pregnant were slim, considering we had only done it twice. By the time I graduated high school, I was 2 months pregnant. I was already starting to get a bump. I broke the news to Frederick. I was surprised. He thought the news of my pregnancy was great. Now his parents were more likely to approve of the marriage. He convinced me that he really loved me and would take care of me. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to leave town before my pregnancy out of wedlock became an embarrassment, and it seemed like the best alternative. I remembered how good the sex with Frederick had been, and somehow the wishful thinking had helped me believe that Frederick and I could have a happy marriage and family. But what to do about Brad? What I did next was as shameful as the fact that I had gotten pregnant. I guess it was a defense mechanism that allowed me to come up with things to be mad at Brad for. I'd say things like, "If you like being around half-naked black women so much, why don't you go back and stay there? You have such a big head that we both can't fit through the door together anymore. I'm tired of you neglecting me. And of course, I saw the way you were looking at that girl. If you need her more than me, take action." Such statements were accompanied by me picking on him for any tardiness, lack of compliments, or annoying behaviors like poking his knuckles. By the time I graduated high school, I told him to forget about the engagement. I started openly dating Frederick. I wasn't sure how Brad would react. He became distant and started drinking. He showed up to our graduation ceremony drunk. The last time I saw him, he was puking his guts out at the Dairy Deep. It helped perpetuate the false belief that I would be better off without him. I was so engrossed in my trip down memory lane that I wasn't paying attention to the incoming. I had already started frantically scanning the crowd when I heard behind me, "Hi, Harry!" I immediately jumped up from my seat. Brad was the only one calling me Harry. I wanted to hug him so badly. "Have a seat, Brad, if you're not busy." Meeting up with old fiancés and friends is the whole reunion thing, isn't it? Brad, we were never engaged. I regretted saying that as soon as I uttered it. "Please sit down." He sat down across from me. His face didn't look friendly. "Is Frederick here?" "Frederick passed away over a year ago. He suffered from multiple sclerosis for the last part of his life." "I sympathize with you." "Any children?" "2. Both girls. One is married, the other is in a same-sex relationship. I'm really an empty nester now. What about you?" "Never been married, no serious girlfriend. I've had trust issues with women." I thought, Oh, shit. He's still holding a grudge against me. Nothing good is going to come of this. I guess I should take my shot and leave if things get too bad. Brad, I came today hoping you'd be here. I'd like to apologize to you for the way I ended our relationship. I'm sorry you left me. I sighed. Yes, and quite rudely and insensitively at that. I'd like to explain why I did that, if you'll allow me. And why should I do that? To give us both a chance to finish our conversation. Don't tell me you haven't wondered why I did what I did. Don't tell me you never thought about me again. I think I've thought about you almost every day since then. I'm sorry, but I find it hard to believe that you thought of me so much, even though you thought of me so little back then. That's why I want to talk to you. I loved you then, and I still do. That's frightening. If you loved me and treated me like that, I'm afraid of what you might do to me if you hated me. Can you get us a couple drinks? I need something for my nerves. A Bloody Mary for me. He stood for a minute with a puzzled look. The drinks aren't free. I think they cost $7.50 apiece. I gave him a 10. He taught me another lesson in how much resentment he still had left in him. I drank my BM pretty quickly. Brad was sipping his bourbon and Sprite. I told him my story about Frederick and me when Brad was on the missionary trip. I explained how ashamed I was. My plan to say nothing and continue our marriage fell apart when I found out I was pregnant. Escaping with Frederick seemed like the easy way out. Now that Frederick was gone and there were no children left, I wondered if there was anything I could do to make up for the way I'd treated him. Brad was silent for quite some time. He seemed to have come to some sort of conclusion. That's quite a story. I had no idea you were pregnant. You know, the fact that you had sex with Frederick and got pregnant isn't the worst thing you did. You chose not to tell me. You didn't believe that my love for you would allow me to find a way for us to stay together. I don't think we have a future now because I know you don't trust me enough. Oh, Brad, if you gave me a chance, I promise I would do everything I could to show you that you can trust me. Just give me a chance. We started to notice that our conversation was being overheard. Brad, could you come up to my room and continue our conversation in private? He agreed and walked over to the table to order alcohol and have it sent to my room. Once in my room, he sat down in a chair and pulled it close to the bed I was sitting on. We talked about some relatively trivial things until the liquor arrived. Once the drinks were poured, the conversation became serious again. I spoke again. I've been convincing myself that you'll be fine when I'm gone. My thoughts were mostly occupied with the pregnancy and getting used to my husband. The sexual component of marriage was the easiest to get used to. Frederick seemed to be looking forward to our child until he found out it was going to be a girl. Nevertheless, he seemed pleased, but not excited. I should have known when he asked me in the delivery room when we could start trying for a boy. As soon as I could, Frederick and I started having sex with the goal of getting pregnant again. More specifically, having a boy was his main goal. He was disappointed again. He started drinking a lot and became rude to me, especially during sex. During one episode of rough sex, my water broke. I went into labor a few weeks premature, and complications arose. Frederick was devastated when he found out I couldn't have any more children. Frederick stayed away from home as much as possible. When he was home, he was angry and rarely engaged with the girls. After about a month, his mood changed. He seemed happier. Our sex life had diminished, but he was no longer rough. I breathed a sigh of relief when he actually became nice to the girls. Frederick worked in his father's business. His father hoped that Frederick would someday replace him. As the years passed, his father became less optimistic about Frederick's ability to run a large business. This became evident in the will that was drawn up after the untimely death of both parents in an automobile accident. Frederick was truly saddened by their passing, but became furious when the will was read. Although he was appointed CEO, his powers were severely limited. The real power and management went to the board of directors. Over time, however, Frederick began to enjoy being a mere figurehead. He attended business dinners where important people mingled with a few celebrities. He prided himself on his charitable work, that is, giving away money, and he always took credit for the fact that the company's affairs took a turn for the worse after his father was gone. The girls and I didn't enjoy his success, except that we had more expenses. With his parents gone, he no longer had to hide his big secret. Not only did he have a mistress, but she gave him the son he so desperately needed. They went from being a secret to being a source of pride for him. The guest house on our property became the home of his second family. He spent more time with her and his son than he did with us. At the time, I had no choice. I couldn't imagine divorcing him and living on much less than what we were used to, at least until the girls finished school. Janet, his mistress, turned out to be a very nice woman. She genuinely loved Frederick and regretted falling in love with a married man. We became friends, and soon the girls and her son were playing together. While I was waiting for the right time to break up the marriage, Frederick received news of his multiple sclerosis. From the beginning, he was not a compliant patient. He was determined to ignore the doctor's advice and walk away with a twinkle in his eye. This meant he went back to smoking cigars, drinking, and whoring. The latter activity was what caused him to lose his mistress. She left with a monthly fee that guaranteed access to his son, though the latter showed no interest in following in his father's footsteps in business or whores. I stayed with Frederick until the very end. When he died, he left all of us, including his second family, in complete material wealth. I am truly free. I can go where I want and do what I want. I hope you want me in your life, whatever it takes. There, I've poured out my soul. What do you say? Bread. I guess I should tell you my story first. After you left me, I started drinking. At one time, I was close to alcohol poisoning. It was after you left with Frederick. I'm glad I didn't know you were pregnant. That might have pushed me even closer to suicide than I was. I saw Harriet's reaction to that statement. She started crying. I got to a good therapist and started my life over. I went to college and dove headfirst into my studies. I finished college in 3 years and was hired at a good company with career opportunities. I hardly dated at all. But even then, I never had more than a first date. Harriet, I have to be honest. You really ripped my heart out and tore it into little pieces. I loved you so much. I never would have believed you could betray me. I let that statement sink in. I've realized over the last 20 years that I never stopped loving you, no matter how hard I tried. Believe me, I've tried hard. Again, I paused for empty effect. Now Harriet was pleasantly surprised. I came here ready to shame you, ridicule you, and make you feel as bad as possible. Now I have my chance, but I just can't do it. Hell, I still love you, despite... I can't help it. The thing I want most right now is to rip your clothes off and make love to you. You don't need to rip my clothes off, Brad. I can take them off just as fast. And she did. Over the next 4 hours, I was able to climax 3 times, and she was able to climax much more. We lay in bed, wet with sweat. We were exhausted, blissfully exhausted. I felt it was time for the ultimate question. I asked her, "Where do we go next?" She replied, "Anywhere." Do you really mean that? Absolutely. If you ask me to sell my house and move where you are, I'll be there. I'll move in with you or buy an apartment near you, whatever you want. I have so much catching up to do. We have about 30 years or more ahead of us to make each other happy. I don't want to waste a minute of it. Okay, here's the plan. I'm coming up with it as I think about it. I need to do a few things to prepare for you moving in with me. You're selling your house. When you're all packed up and ready to move, call me and tell me you're on your way. Until then, don't call me. Let's let our anticipation build so we'll experience an explosion of joy and, of course, sex when you arrive. It'll be just like tonight, only better. She looked a little puzzled, but readily agreed. We made love for as long as we could before I had to check out of the room. Harriet, oh my God, my wildest dreams had come true. I immediately called the girls and told them about my good fortune. I can't wait for the girls to meet Brad. Over the years, I have told them about Brad. They agreed with me long ago that they wished I had married him, even though they realized they wouldn't have been born then. After talking to the girls, I changed my Facebook page to In a Relationship. If there was any better way to let the world know, I would have. In the weeks that followed, I was busy getting rid of clothes and furniture, closing utility bills, saying goodbye, and selling the house. My realtor said I had priced it too low, but I wanted the house to sell quickly, and so it did. Everything was going well except that I was dying to call Brad before I was ready. I picked up the phone a few times, but the last thing I wanted to do was upset Brad. I had trouble falling asleep even as I tried to remember our night together. Finally, before I completely lost my mind, it was time. My heart was beating so hard it was ready to jump out of my chest. I was about to call my one and only true lover to tell him that I was on my way to the beginning of the happiest time of my life. "Hello," a female voice answered. I guessed it was the maid Brad had probably hired to clean up before I arrived. "Yes, can I talk to Brad? He's very busy right now. We're getting our daughter ready for college. Can I tell him who's calling?" Daughter? I didn't know Brad had a daughter." "Then you must not know him very well. Usually everyone he talks to hears him brag about his daughter and son ad nauseum. Sometimes I get lucky and get mentioned." She chuckled. "And you?" "His wife, of course. Hey, you're not the crazy bitch who tried to seduce my husband at the reunion, are you? Are you Harriet?" I fell to my knees and sobbed. My world had just been shattered. "Hello, Harriet?" It was Brad's voice. "Now you know how it feels. Don't you dare call again." Brad. I looked at my wife. It was obvious she was worried about the call. She said, "I guess you were right after all. I can't believe she could have called here." I told you she was confident. Apparently she was able to convince the doctors that it was okay for her to leave the sanitarium. She wanted to believe so badly that I was single and wanted her that she heard me say it in her mind. I bet she is so crazy she would have passed a lie detector test. When I realized how unhinged she was, I stopped being angry at her for the way she treated me years ago. I'm afraid she mistook my kindness for something more. I'm so glad I didn't give her our address. Too bad she had our phone number. She must have gotten it from the reunion committee. If she calls again, we'll have to change the phone number. We may have to get a protective order from her. I feel sorry for her in a way. Poor Harriet. She really will be poor Harriet if she dares to show up at my house. I watched my wife retire to our daughter's bedroom. I gave a satisfied sigh. I praised myself for managing to change my revenge plan in a matter of seconds. I only wish I had a videotape of her reaction to the phone call. I don't care if revenge is served hot or cold. It still tastes good.